So I want to give you a little bit of a background on the work that we're going to talk about. And I'll do it very quickly because I know we're running short on time. In 2004, I organized a meeting of people working on economic and social rights within the human rights framework with progressive economists. Primarily because I'm an economist by training. That's what that's sort of my paid job. And but I'm also an activist, and it was actually at the initial meeting that started the U.S. Human Rights Network, where we were talking about poverty and economic and social rights, and there was a campaign on the elections, and I forget, it was the first time Bush became president, and people were talking about poverty, and I kept saying, well, if we're going to talk about poverty and the eradication of poverty, are we going to ask for full employment? And the group of human rights activists were like, well, how do we ask for that? And I said, well, we need to talk about economic policy if we're going to talk about poverty. And so after that and many other discussions, I kept saying that, you know, we need to bring together progressive economists who want the same things with people working on economic and social rights to try and come up with policy alternatives. So the first meeting we had, we put these groups of people together and had an interesting discussion, and there's a report that came out of that called Why Mess 1, which is the first one, which is on our website. And then at the end of that meeting, we said, you know, it's a lot to talk about how do we pull these communities together to try and come up with an analysis. What we really need to do is to try to do the analysis in a country. Right? I mean, it's okay to sit and sort of talk at a ethereal level or a abstract level and say, you know, progressive economists want this, economic social rights want this, and how do we do this together? We thought we'll implement this in a study. So we decided to do a two-country study, and we decided to work in Mexico. And originally we were only going to work in third world countries and sort of use this analysis in third world countries. And as we started talking about it, we said, you know, we need to do it in the U.S. And it was also really because of my involvement, my increased involvement with the U.S. Human Rights Network and the human rights movement in the U.S. I thought, let's do U.S. and Mexico and look at both of these. So this report that you just got is sort of the early version or summary version of this two-country study that we did, and the kind of methodology that we used to try to look at economic policy from a human rights perspective. So in these studies, we were really ambitious, and so we looked at monetary and fiscal policy, we looked at expenditure policy, tax policy, trade, we looked at NAFTA, and then we looked at regulation and pension reform. So I'm not going to talk about all of those, but we sort of thought, we're not going to do an extensive study of all of these issues, but what we thought is we'd pilot a form of analysis, right? How do we actually look at these from a human rights perspective? And the agenda and the goal that we had, I worked with another economist called Diane Nelson, and there was an entire team of people who did the research. We had an advisory committee, so it was an elaborate process. We had many meetings to have people give us input. But the goal was that, you know, when we do human rights work, most often I think, we wait for economic policy to happen, and then we talk about the violations that happen because of economic policy, right? It's like something happens and then your right to housing is gone, or the right to education is gone, or the right to, but we don't question that economic policy that created those violations. So the idea behind this project was to turn the lens and say, okay, if we actually believe that there is economic and social rights and a way in which we look at it, what do those principles tell us about economic policy making before the violations happen, right? Is there an ethical framework by which we can use human rights to inform our judgment about economic policy making. So let's look at macroeconomic policy. Let's look at monetary policy. And is there something that we can say about those economic policies from the kind of basic human rights perspective? So as I said, this is an attempt, and just so you know, we're finishing a full book of 10 chapters. You know, these are sort of little snippets of the analysis, but the full book will be out hopefully this spring. Zed Publishers just gave us a contract, and we're in draft, and so it's going to go to them in the end of September. So there'll be an extensive sort of detailed study of how to use this. And what we try to do in this study is to take analysis that economists have done already, not for everyone to recreate the work. And I want to make clear that it's work done by progressive economists, because I think we have to be very clear about the distinction between economists. The conservative economists are the ones that create this mess. And we don't like them. But there's a whole group of progressive economists who have done a lot of work, and you don't really hear about them. And you don't hear about the analysis. But that analysis is very useful for human rights communities to use, because, and you don't have to recreate it, right? It's not work that needs to be reinvented. You don't need to measure everything all over again. There's an entire body of work. So what this project is doing is taking that work that's been done and putting it under the umbrella of human rights to try and make it useful to the human rights community as a form of analysis and also as an advocacy tool. So after this, as I said, the book came out, and James actually was on the advisory committee to the original project, and then the crisis happened. So this was all happening before the crisis, and then the crisis happened, and then James and I kind of partnered together, and we wrote. Actually, it was the financial crisis meeting at the UN, and working with Kali and the U.S. Human Rights Network, we decided that we needed to put together something for the crisis, because all of this was before the crisis. And there's a pamphlet, like an 8-page thing that we did on the crisis that we've used in the network of.
And it was emailed to everyone. This
yeah,
was emailed to
but
everyone.
I think it's in your envelopes, right? And we put this together in terms of the crisis, and then now we've been writing blogs, and we're trying to create more and more work to make the work that we did popularly accessible and become a part of a campaign. So what we want to do today is we're going to take quite a few hours to try and give as many tools as possible. But while we're doing it, what I want you to, and we're going to sort of talk for a while, and then what we want you to think about while you're listening to us about macro policy and monetary and fiscal policy is, one, to think about how it's useful to the work that you're doing. How will you take it back, and is there something that's useful for you to take back? The other is, what are the kind of campaigns you think you can start with the analysis that we're doing, or is it useful? And what we also would like is just feedback in terms of, are there big parts we're missing that would be more useful to you, right? And as I said, I know that a lot of you work on specific rights. We're going to look at more the macro policies than the specific rights, and so try and think about how those macro policies can then inform and help your own advocacy on the specific rights. And so we're gonna do this presentation between the two of us, and then over lunch, and I'm a little confused about how timing, but I think we'll break up over lunch, and then people can break up into groups and think about the advocacy strategies during lunch, and then we can come back and pull it all together to see if there's something that comes out of it.